Wasteland 2 is not the first Wasteland game, but it is the first made in this millennium. After dabbling with the 1988 original classic for a few hours, I can say that it's a title I appreciate more than one I actually want to play right now. Picking between it or its remastered edition is synonymous with picking between whatever passed for a save system when Ronald Reagan was president, or picking an art style that I can say is definitely not an upgrade. I'm sure there's a lot to love, and I certainly got a good feel for its characters in the brief time I spent with it, but for our purposes here I'm tackling Wasteland 2 from the viewpoint of a series newcomer, having not played the original or the isometric Fallout games from the 90s, with which Wasteland shares a crisscrossy incestual IP history, so keep that perspective in mind. You should also keep in mind the upload date of this video, because rolling credits on this game for the first time in 2021 meant two things for me. One is that I benefited from playing the director's cut, which fixed most of the bugs and UI quirks that original reviews mention, and two is that I've got over a half decade of hindsight since this game's launch. I may not have played the original CRPGs that inspired these modern revivals, but I've certainly played a ton of the revived themselves, starting with Pillars of Eternity in 2015. And I think that's probably why it's taken me a bit to get around to this one particularly. It wasn't until I saw positive reception that Wasteland 3 was getting that I finally told myself I would get into this series proper, because from the outside looking in, I always perceived Wasteland 2 to be a bit dry. And after just shy of a mostly enjoyable 50 hours, I don't think my first impressions were that far off. I liked Wasteland 2 and can easily see myself booting it up again in the future, and if you're just here for a recommendation, then it's one I could definitely give. But I would never accuse this game of putting its best foot forward. Because the worst couple of hours of Wasteland 2 are the first couple of hours of Wasteland 2. After a live-action cutscene, you'll get a hard cut to a reminder of how small this game's budget was, and while having an art direction of everything being ugly is something I got over quickly, some other parts of the user experience took more of an adjustment period. I've played tons of isometric games before, and I've never played one where the camera angle just didn't feel right. It's just so uncomfortably close to being correct. It's like 2 to 3 degrees off, but you'll never see as far in front of you as you need to. It also feels like there's 24 character portraits being split between the hundreds of different NPCs you'll interact with. Some of the font choices will really make you scratch your head in confusion, and it does that partial VO things where sometimes you'll get audible text, and sometimes you're reading. Wasteland 2 is unsexy. Almost everything that exists at the periphery of the experience is handled inelegantly at best. More than most products, it could have used more resources than it got, but the saving grace here is that most of these downfalls, like I said, are tangential to the core game. The skeleton underneath is healthy, indicating that its small budget was delicately and accurately applied. It does the CRPG thing, and it does it pretty well. It's got in-depth character building, hours of exploration, difficult strategic combat, and a ton of player freedom and narrative reactivity. It may not be the most glamorous implementation of the formula, but it's a successful implementation nonetheless. Character creation begins with the construction of not one character, but a 4-man party, and will be your first introduction to the specifics of the very specific stat system. Lockpicking and safe cracking are considered two different skills here. That's the level of granularity we're looking at. Not all the skills lead to truly unique playstyles, because at least half of these are just different pegs to line up with Wasteland's different holes. But it does give you a lot to think about. You want to make sure that your party is a jack of all trades, but the individuals within it are certainly not. Characters need to be specialized in both their combat and non-combat capabilities to ensure you have maximum coverage, and can take full advantage of the minimum resources the deserts offer, because Wasteland 2 wants you to feel how brutal these wastes are. You play as the Desert Rangers, the closest thing that Arizona's had to a police department since the bombs fell. And the borders of Arizona might as well be the end of the world because of how limited post-apocalypse communication is. Short-range radio transmission is the best we've got, and is the primary method via which you'll be nudged into the right direction. While you can technically wander around the overworld map and go mostly where you please, there is danger in doing so. Random encounters with enemies can drain you of your resources, and you'll also be managing a party-wide water meter. Until you know where the oases or settlements are that will help you refill, that meter draining represents a common and unceremonious death out on the wastes. That radio will pick up nearby transmissions, and it's also where you'll get orders from HQ, because the Desert Rangers are on the receiving end of Wasteland's 911. It's how you'll primarily get funneled to new towns and events, and is, for most part, the central conceit of the game. Turns out the Wasteland's inhabitants aren't too trusting of strangers with guns, and earning that trust takes time. What you would consider the main quest is, more often than not, just finding ways to boost that radio signal and get more powerful radiation suits so you can reach parts of Arizona behind increasingly dangerous radiation walls, and consequently help more people. That broadness to the main quest gives Wasteland 2 a very open form factor. Every time you boot it up, you can realistically set your own objectives and decide what you want to do. More often than not, for me, that objective was finding ways to strap together some cash and fund a major push into enemy territory, because resource management is crucial in the Wasteland. Every trigger pulled on every gun in every ranger's hand is dollars spent, because unlike some of its fantasy contemporaries, your primary method of dealing damage doesn't regenerate. Ammo doesn't grow on trees, and you have to be careful how you're shooting it. Same goes for bandages. The turn-based fights themselves are usually pretty straightforward affairs in terms of getting behind cover and focusing fire on the most dangerous threat, but there's a lot of strategy in terms of deciding when to fight. Do you have the resources you need? Is your party healthy? Do you have any explosives that can dramatically swing a fight gone south? And perhaps more importantly, is it even worth it? That last question is especially worth considering because Wasteland 2 has permadeath. There is a period where characters are downed and have the potential to be revived, but too much time or too much damage sustained in that downed state, and they are gone for good, meaning even benign encounters have a chance to go profoundly bad. All of those transient resources, rangers themselves included, means that you'll need to be thoughtful about how you play, and that constant pressure can be a little stressful at times, and that stress is no doubt intentional. It's why you really need to contextualize this game in alignment with its Kickstarter and when it came out. The level of participation required to not dehydrate out in the wastes isn't just thematically appropriate, it's also a rejection of how RPGs at the time were built. Wasteland 2 wasn't just the return of a long-dead franchise, it was the return of a long-dead genre. The cerebral, slow-paced, very adult-focused CRPGs from the 90s. A genre with an audience perceived to be too small for the game budgets of the 2000s. A problem that would not be rectified until both the dawn of community funding and the prevalence of digital distribution allowing for virtual shelf space that was far less difficult to achieve than its physical equivalent. Be mindful of that, because I think if you have hesitations about whether or not Wasteland 2 is for you, then those hesitations are probably well-founded. Wasteland 2 is a challenging and oftentimes kind of bumpy experience, and it's a particularly slow burn in a genre that I think can inherently burn slow in the first place, and you need to know that going in. Because Wasteland 2 is cleanly sliced into two totally separate, totally distinct halves. There is a near literal line in the sand that demarcates Wasteland Part 2, and I think it's at this Part 2 where the game went from good to great. And in order to discuss why, I'll need to get into spoilers. Check the description and go to the next chapter if you're looking to avoid them. The borders of Arizona are not the edge of civilization. After boosting radio frequency far enough, the Rangers pick up broadcasts to the west in Southern California, and after a quick helicopter ride to get there, you're almost immediately confronted with how much more content is actually in store for you until you hit the credits. A splash of new colors previously not on the Wasteland palette will fill your eyes. Closer proximity to the ocean has allowed leafy greens to reclaim the abandoned buildings of Los Angeles, and this county is a highly contested area. A brief introductory quest will familiarize you with no less than half a dozen new factions, each with their own goals, conflicts, and hierarchies that are trying to make Los Angeles their own. And as you would expect from the genre, the fates of these factions are largely tied to which choices you make and which NPCs you set to 0 HP. It's here where you finally get to see some of the game's character, where you get more involved crisscrossing stories that feel larger than just the woes of individual towns. The children of the Citadel are desperately trying to cyborg themselves to survive the harsh wastes. God's militia follows a New Testament with their Christ figure being a post-apocalypse scavenger who was born again after stumbling across a televangelist VHS tape. The Mannerites are sticklers for propriety and civility, even when the actions they perform can be anything but. The wiki is telling me that Arizona had just as many, if not more, factions, but California does a better job at putting them on display, distinguishing them, and tying them back to memorable leaders that it feels like they had way more. And it's for that reason that I found more enjoyment in aiding or hindering all the characters in Wasteland 2 Part 2. And by the time my credits rolled, at least 2 of these factions didn't exist anymore, purely because of the decisions that I made. and the remaining were more than happy to fill those power vacuums. It's still not perfect, especially if you stumble across a particular line of events that the game's usual reactivity isn't prepared to account for, but it is a marked improvement over the first half, and it's a shame when you realize just how few people actually stuck it out that far. Wasteland 2 does two things really well: atmosphere and freedom. Granted, it's not complete freedom by virtue of how the world opens up in waves, but within each of those waves, your objective is really to just go do Wasteland things. It may not be my number one CRPG recommendation, and certainly not the one I'd push you to play first, but Wasteland 2 is still a massively compelling game, if not a massively polished one. There's a surprisingly wholesome story baked into the core gameplay loop about community, and reopening communication avenues to bring people together, and that story and atmosphere really get to shine because of how little gets in its way. For all of its unsexiness, Wasteland 2 has a firm understanding of what it is. There's no gimmicks here. You won't find a stronghold management minigame sending you push notifications when you're out exploring, because Wasteland 2 was released at a time when being a CRPG was the gimmick. Its gimmick is being a challenging isometric adventure with tough decisions and lasting consequences. Its gimmick is having a reactive, tangible world that you can force your way through in a number of different ways. Its gimmick is that it's not afraid of being unappealing to folks who aren't in the target audience. Above all, Wasteland 2's gimmick is that it's confident it doesn't need one, and I don't think that confidence was misplaced.